transactions hit an all-time high of over rupees 15 lakh crore in July 2023. UPI, or the Unified Payments Interface, is also going global, with many countries adapting to its use. From 2016 to 2023, UPI is a success story that is being spoken of and acknowledged the world over. Welcome to TOI Business Bytes. Telling us about the road ahead for UPI and how risks for cybersecurity are being handled is Praveena Rai. She's Chief Operating Officer of NPCI. So Praveena, my first question to you is that, what has the journey been like for UPI? I mean, according to the economic survey that came out earlier this year, half of India's digital transactions, in fact, more than half of them, come under UPI, are accounted for by UPI. So what has the journey been like?
The journey has, of course, been phenomenal. The data speaks for itself. The annual growth is very good. We are hitting about 9 billion transactions a month now, between P2M, which is person to person, and P2M, which is merchant transactions. What used to be more in the favor of P2P has now started tilting a little bit in the favor of merchant transactions. So we are seeing increase in share of merchant transactions there. And I think the number is probably higher than that. 60 to 70% transactions of digital transactions in the country today are happening on UPI.
So where do you see UPI headed in the coming few years, both in terms of the volume and the value of transactions, and what are the next steps to evolution towards a cashless economy?
Yeah, I think the objective for India is a less cash economy. This is something that we've all agreed, and keep looking at where cash is being used and to solve the problems that people face, eliminate friction, so that it's easier and more comfortable to use digital payments while cash is always available as an option. And when we see volume value drivers, the volume driver, of course, is in bringing this to more people and creating more use cases, more applications for UPI to be used, and that is a continuous journey. This year, for example, we'll start seeing significant scale up of people being onboarded onto UPI using their Aadhaar number. Earlier, it used to be really based on the debit card, and one reaches the level of saturation of people who are very comfortable using debit card for onboarding. So Aadhaar should bring in one large swath of people there. And then it comes to use cases. The traditional ones have been person to person, person to merchant. How do we take it into auto pay, which is mandates? One-time mandates, which has applications in IPO. We're looking at sort of multiple debit, which is a very interesting capital market use case, and so on and so forth. So really looking at the entire gamut of use cases to drive volume numbers, and this number is only going to keep increasing exponentially. When it comes to value, there again, I think the person-to-person transactions on a value basis have been a little on the higher side, just given the complete ubiquity of acceptance of UPI on the merchant piece, where you can buy a cup of tea with UPI. The transaction size buckets have really been very widespread. The permitted transaction size on UPI is 1 lakh or 2 lakhs. 2 lakhs is for verified merchants and certain specific category of merchants, and everywhere else it's 1 lakh. That's a standard. But we do find you'll find transactions 0 to 50, 50 to 200, 200 to 500, and so on and so forth. And now we are starting to see this number also increase, what we call the average ticket size and the overall value of transactions, especially with a credit on UPI as a use case that is starting to come in with the linkage of RuPay credit card. So what would have been a slightly higher value of transactions that would have earlier been used on a credit card, the customers have now started using that on UPI. So both in volume and value terms, the drivers are significant, and there is still a lot of headroom for growth on both parameters.
UPI is now actually going global, with a lot of countries like France, Singapore adopting to it. So what are the global lessons for a project of this scale?
Certainly, with the goings on in the world stage of the last few years, we're certainly taking a step back from globalization, where people would say it doesn't matter where it is, doesn't matter where it's hosted. everyone can use a service. I think increasingly countries want to hold control over sovereignty. They look at digital payments or payments as something very core to a country, and hence want to manage it tightly as well. So the way we've looked at it from an international standpoint is not to say, hey, we've got something and this can now work anywhere in the world, but to really look at creating those corridors, creating those bilateral relationships and arrangements, largely driven and managed through central bank arrangements, right? And with large entities, clearing houses on the other side, so that we look at it with three lenses. One is what does this do for the remittance corridor, people wanting to pay into India, out of India. The second is really acceptance, which is people carrying a RuPay card or people who are using UPI being able to go to another country and perform transactions seamlessly. And third is, of course, countries that actually want to use UPI. So I think these are sort of the three strategic facets. It's not going to be something that happens overnight. It's a step-by-step process and a journey where I think a lot of intent and agreements have come in. Market enablement is in process, and slowly and steadily this will move forward now.
But with the volume and the value of shared digital transactions that we are moving towards, comes the risk of any cyber fraud. So how are you dealing with that?
I think the risk of fraud itself, while you use the word cyber fraud, I think one can look at it in two categories. Cyber fraud is sort of a bit more large scale, centrally oriented. And of course, that's where the entire security systems of an organization kick in. We are, critical national infrastructure. So I think we orient ourselves towards what we call a zero trust architecture when it comes to cybersecurity and information security. But there is also the other category, which has to do with really day-to-day users becoming susceptible. And that really becomes a form of social engineering fraud. It's not really cyber fraud. And there we play a very strong role, both from an awareness standpoint, because in many cases people are becoming gullible and falling prey to activities of miscreants and divulging information or voluntarily taking action because they have believed something that is actually not true. However, over and above that, we drive very strong risk models, including AI-driven models by which we are able to derive a risk score, which tells us, what we believe is the status of this particular transaction, based on which sometimes there could be a few cases where even a good transaction gets stopped. But we think that's important where there is a higher risk score that has gotten identified. So I think both technology-driven controls as well as driving awareness in the industry.
Okay, and you spoke of RuPay. So what has the growth journey been for RuPay, and what are the next steps to make it evolve even more?
So RuPay, as India's card scheme, has really come a long way. It's a young scheme compared to other schemes that operate globally. And good to say that it has 1/3 of presence in the market when it comes to debit cards, and increasing its presence when it comes to credit card. And the approach of RuPay is always driven, as with all NPCI products, through innovation, through technology, and really driving very cutting-edge customer experience. And that's really where RuPay credit cards now, I think, about 30-35% of all cards issued in the market today would be on RuPay. Of course, it's a small base because this action has started in the last 2 to 3 years. But now with RuPay credit card being linked to UPI, we are seeing a very significant demand kick up. Customers really want to use UPI, the convenience of UPI. They love the experience of UPI. And the only reason they probably carried their wallet, was because there would be some instances where they still want to use credit or use a credit card for purpose of convenience, rewards, and so on and so forth. Now all of that kind of gets combined, and once you put your card details and link your card into UPI, you can sort of leave that wallet back home. So I think that's what everyone's excited about. So UPI now, debit to a bank account, debit to RuPay credit card. Both of this is really working very well. Nearly, we are seeing more than a doubling of transactions on a per card basis. We're seeing significant increase in sort of the spends on a card, and it's a very fast growing portfolio as we speak. So I think looking at this really making a big difference over the next 2 years. And for NPCI, on the back of both UPI and RuPay, driving credit penetration, the way this has worked with payment so far, on payment rails now driving credit is going to be a big strategic focus.